The ballroom doors closed behind Noella with a soft click, but the silence that followed was anything but gentle. "There she is," someone called from across the room. Heads turned all at once. Noella tightened her grip on the small silver gift bag in her hand and forced herself to keep walking. A laugh rang out before she had even reached the first table. She actually came alone, her cousin Melissa said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear. Another relative snorted. Couldn't even find somebody willing to spend one evening with her. The laughter spread from table to table. At the center of it all, the bride, Vanessa Brooks, didn't stop it. Instead, she lifted her champagne glass with a smile that barely hid her satisfaction. "I guess," Vanessa said sweetly, "some people are just married to their careers." More laughter. Noella kept her shoulders straight, refusing to let anyone see the sting behind her calm expression. She had survived years of these family gatherings. She knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted her to react. They wanted proof that their words still had power. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. She lowered her eyes toward the seating chart instead. Then she realized something that hurt even more. Her name wasn't beside the family tables. It had been placed at a lonely table near the service entrance, beside the vendors and distant guests no one else wanted to sit with. That wasn't an accident. Vanessa had planned this. And somehow, the evening was only getting started. Noella quietly walked to the isolated table without saying a word. As she passed the main family tables, conversations continued just loudly enough for her to hear. "I told you she'd show up by herself. 31 already. Such a shame. All that education, and still nobody wants her." Each sentence landed like another small cut. None of them mentioned the years she'd spent caring for her father after diabetes stole his eyesight. None of them mentioned the nights she worked overtime to keep medical bills paid. None of them mentioned the promotion she'd earned only 3 months earlier to senior corporate compliance manager. To them, none of it mattered. In the Brooks family, success wasn't measured by character. It was measured by whether someone walked into a room wearing a wedding ring. Noella placed the wrapped gift beside her chair and slowly sat down. From where she was, she could see every smiling face in the ballroom. They could all see her too. She was alone on purpose. The MC stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin dinner, our beautiful bride would like to say a few words." Applause filled the room. Vanessa accepted the microphone with effortless confidence. "I just want to thank everyone who came tonight," she began warmly. "It means everything to celebrate this day surrounded by the people who matter most, especially those lucky enough to have someone standing beside them." Her eyes drifted toward Noella. The pause was deliberate. Several relatives chuckled before Vanessa continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Noella looked down at her purse. She could still leave. No explanation. No confrontation. Just walk out before dinner was served. Maybe that would be easier than pretending this humiliation didn't bother her. Her fingers wrapped around the purse strap. She stood. Then, the grand ballroom doors swung open. Every conversation stopped. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, scanning the crowded room with surprising urgency. His eyes moved across dozens of guests, until they landed on Noella. Without hesitation, he crossed the ballroom, past the bride, past the groom, past the head table. Every guest watched in complete silence. He stopped directly in front of Noella. Then, with a warm smile, he gently took her hand. "I'm so sorry I'm late, darling," he said clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. Not a single person laughed anymore. The room fell into absolute silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Noella stared at the stranger, her hand still resting in his. She searched his face, hoping some flicker of recognition would appear. Nothing. She had never seen him before. The silence finally broke when Melissa let out an awkward laugh. Oh, this is interesting. Several relatives exchanged amused looks. So she did find someone after all. Vanessa folded her arms, her smile returning. Well, she said, I wasn't expecting a surprise guest. The man turned politely toward her. I apologize for arriving unannounced. And you are? Vanessa asked. He smiled. My name is Ethan. Nothing more. No last name. No explanation. Vanessa waited for him to continue. When he didn't, she looked toward Noella. You've never mentioned Ethan. Noella slowly shook her head. Because, she answered honestly, I've never met him before. That answer rippled through the ballroom. What? You've never met him. So who's this guy? Even Ethan looked unsurprised by the confusion. He released Noella's hand, careful not to make the moment feel theatrical. I understand why this seems unusual, he said calmly, but I promise everything will make sense. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. It certainly needs to. Noella lowered her voice. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. Ethan looked directly at her. No. There wasn't a trace of hesitation in his answer. I've been looking for you. Those 6 words made her even more confused. For me? Yes. But why? He offered only a gentle smile. I'd rather explain when the time is right. Vanessa let out a sarcastic laugh. Oh, wonderful, mysterious too. A few relatives laughed with her. One uncle leaned across his table. Noella, are you sure this isn't one of those online dating surprises? Another cousin whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Maybe she hired him. The comment drew another wave of chuckles. Noella felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't hire anyone, she said firmly. I don't even know him. Ethan remained perfectly composed. I can assure everyone, he said, Miss Brooks had no idea I was coming. His confidence slowly began replacing the family's amusement with curiosity. Instead of defending himself further, Ethan glanced around the ballroom. His eyes stopped on Noella's table. A lonely round table, tucked beside the service entrance. Half the chairs were empty. Waiters carrying trays passed only a few feet away. He frowned. Is this where Miss Brooks was assigned to sit? Vanessa answered before anyone else could. Yes. Was there a reason? That's simply how the seating worked out. Ethan looked across the ballroom. Every immediate family member sat together near the dance floor. Every married couple had been carefully placed. Only Noella had been separated. His expression remained courteous, but something in his eyes hardened. I see. He turned toward one of the banquet coordinators standing nearby. Would you mind bringing another chair? The coordinator nodded instinctively. Before he could move, Vanessa interrupted. I'm afraid that's not possible. Everyone looked at her. The seating plan has already been finalized. She smiled sweetly. We've worked on it for weeks. The coordinator froze, unsure whose instructions to follow. Ethan nodded politely. I understand. For a moment, it seemed he would simply accept her decision. Instead, he asked one quiet question. Has Miss Brooks been treated with this level of consideration all evening? Nobody answered. Several relatives suddenly found their glasses fascinating. Others looked away. Noella wished the floor would open beneath her. Watching the room fall silent stirred a memory she hadn't thought about in months. She had been leaving a corporate compliance conference after delivering a presentation. Rain had just begun falling. People hurried toward taxis, umbrellas opening as they rushed past one another. Then she noticed an elderly man stumble near the entrance. His walking cane slipped. He collapsed against the pavement. For one terrible moment, dozens of people simply walked around him. Some glanced over. Most kept moving. Noella dropped her laptop bag without thinking. "Sir." She knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" The elderly man struggled to answer. "My chest." She immediately called emergency services while loosening his tie. She stayed beside him, keeping him awake until paramedics arrived. When they loaded him into the ambulance, he reached weakly into his coat pocket. "Please." He tried handing her an envelope. She gently pushed it back. "You don't owe me anything. But you've saved." "No," she interrupted softly. "I only did what anyone should." The paramedics closed the ambulance doors. Reporters had already begun gathering after recognizing the elderly gentleman. Rather than waiting, Noella quietly picked up her soaked laptop bag and walked away before anyone asked her name. She never expected to see him again. The memory faded as Ethan's voice brought her back to the ballroom. "I've spent quite some time trying to find someone," he said. "And now that I have..." He glanced toward Vanessa. "I'd like to make sure she's treated with the respect she deserves." Vanessa forced a laugh. "I think you're taking a seating arrangement a little too seriously." "Am I?" His tone remained calm. "There are moments when a seating arrangement says much more than where someone eats dinner." The remark landed harder than anyone expected. Noella looked at him again. Who was this man? Why did he care? And how did he know enough to defend her without knowing what had happened tonight? Vanessa crossed her arms. "I still don't know who you really are." Ethan smiled politely. "You will." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card. Vanessa accepted it confidently. The smile disappeared from her face almost instantly. Her eyes widened. She looked back at the card, then at Ethan, then back at the card again. For the first time that evening, the bride looked genuinely shaken. Vanessa stared at the business card as though she had read it incorrectly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The groom noticed her expression and leaned closer. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she silently handed him the card. His eyebrows rose. Around the ballroom, curious relatives began whispering. "What does it say? Who is he? Why does she suddenly look nervous?" One of the younger cousins discreetly pulled out his phone and typed Ethan's name into a search engine. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. "Wait." The person beside him looked over his shoulder. Within moments, more guests were searching. The whispers spread faster than the music. "I think he's one of the Langfords." The Langford group. That Langford group. Several business guests, who had been chatting near the bar, suddenly turned toward Ethan with unmistakable recognition. One quietly excused himself and walked over. "Mr. Langford," he said respectfully, extending his hand. "I didn't realize you would be attending tonight." Ethan shook it politely. It was a last-minute decision. That single exchange changed the atmosphere. The laughter that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier disappeared completely. Vanessa's new father-in-law approached with careful steps. He had spent decades building his own manufacturing company and immediately recognized the surname. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he said respectfully, "are you connected with the Langford group?" Ethan nodded. "I am." Nothing more. He didn't boast. He didn't elaborate. Yet the simple confirmation carried enough weight to silence the room again. The older businessman smiled politely. "It is an honor to meet you." As he stepped away, several relatives who had mocked Noella moments earlier suddenly changed their tone. An aunt hurried over. "Noella, dear, why didn't you tell us you had friends like this?" Before Noella could answer, another cousin chimed in. "You've always been so private." Melissa laughed nervously. "We were only teasing you earlier." Noella looked from one face to another. The warmth in their voices hadn't appeared because they suddenly respected her. It had appeared because they believed she was connected to wealth. That realization hurt more than the jokes. "I truly don't know him," she said quietly. "I've never met him before tonight." No one seemed willing to believe her anymore. Vanessa waited until Ethan became occupied greeting another business guest. Then she pulled Noella aside, near the floral display. "What exactly are you doing?" she demanded in a low voice. Noella frowned. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." "I honestly don't." Vanessa glanced toward Ethan before lowering her voice even further. "You've been hiding him." "I haven't." "You seriously expect me to believe that?" "I've told you the truth." Vanessa folded her arms. "You couldn't stand the idea of showing up alone, so you decided to make some dramatic entrance." Noella stared at her in disbelief. "I didn't even know he was coming." "Oh, please. You don't have to believe me." "I don't." Before Noella could respond again, the MC called everyone back to their seats. Dinner had not yet been served when Vanessa stepped onto the stage with a microphone. She smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. "I'd like to thank everyone for making today unforgettable." Polite applause followed. She glanced briefly toward Noella. "I've always believed everyone eventually finds happiness." Another pause. "Sometimes it just takes a little longer than expected." A few uncomfortable laughs drifted through the ballroom. The joke didn't land the way she had hoped. Too many people were now watching Ethan instead. Vanessa quickly continued with her toast, trying to steer attention back to the wedding. When she finished, guests began applauding. Before the applause faded completely, Ethan rose from his chair. "Excuse me." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room naturally fell quiet. He looked toward Vanessa. "May I say a few words?" Vanessa hesitated. Every eye shifted to her. Refusing him now would only create more questions. With a tight smile, she nodded. "Of course." Ethan walked calmly to the front of the ballroom. He accepted the microphone, but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he slowly looked around the room. His gaze lingered on table after table. Then he asked one simple question. "How many of you actually know Noella Brooks?" Silence. People exchanged uncertain looks. Someone coughed. A fork clinked softly against a plate. No hands went up. Ethan nodded slightly, as though the silence itself had answered him. "I suspected as much." He turned toward Noella. "You've spent years allowing your actions to speak for you." She looked back at him, still completely confused. "I doubt you've ever told anyone here what happened 6 months ago." She slowly shook her head. "No. I didn't think so." He faced the guests once more. 6 months ago, this woman changed someone's life." The ballroom became so quiet that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. An uncle frowned. "What happened?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm not ready to tell you that part." Confused murmurs spread across the room. "If this isn't about a relationship," Melissa whispered. "Then what is it about?" Ethan carefully returned the microphone to its stand. "It has nothing to do with romance." He looked toward the ballroom entrance. "It has to do with gratitude." Then he turned to one of the hotel attendants standing nearby. "Would you please open the main doors?" The attendant blinked. "Sir, our final guest has just arrived." Every head in the ballroom slowly turned toward the entrance. The massive doors began to open. The ballroom doors swung open slowly. A hush settled over the room as an elderly gentleman entered, leaning lightly on a polished wooden cane. His silver hair was neatly combed, and although age had slowed his steps, there was an unmistakable dignity about him. 2 attendants walked a respectful distance behind him, but he waved them back with a gentle smile. "I can manage," he said quietly. Several guests stood the moment they recognized him. One businessman whispered in disbelief. That's Richard Langford. Another immediately rose from his chair. I've only ever seen him at industry conferences. Within seconds, more people were standing. The movement spread through the ballroom like a wave. Noella remained seated. She stared at the elderly man, feeling as though she had seen him somewhere before. Then he smiled. The memory rushed back all at once. Rain. The conference entrance. The ambulance. The trembling hand reaching toward her. The envelope she had refused. Her eyes widened. You. Richard's smile grew warmer. Yes. He walked directly toward her. Not toward the bride. Not toward the groom. Toward Noella. When he reached her table, he stopped and looked at her with genuine gratitude. I've hoped for this opportunity for a very long time. Noella slowly stood. I thought you recovered. I did. His voice was calm and steady. And I'm here because you made sure I had that chance. She shook her head gently. I only called for help. Richard smiled. No. You stayed. The words carried through the silent ballroom. When everyone else hurried past, you stayed. Noella lowered her eyes. I couldn't just leave. You could have. He looked around the room. Many people did. No one spoke. Richard continued. People walked around me. His hand rested lightly on the handle of his cane. Some looked. Most didn't. But one young woman dropped everything she was doing. He turned toward Noella again. She knelt beside a complete stranger. She kept me talking while we waited for the ambulance. And when I tried to thank her, he smiled softly. As she refused, several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Melissa slowly lowered her phone. An aunt who had laughed earlier stared at the floor. Vanessa remained frozen near the head table. Richard continued speaking. I asked someone to find her. It wasn't easy. He chuckled lightly. She left before reporters arrived. I never even learned her name. Noella looked surprised. You were looking for me. For months. Richard nodded. My office reviewed conference registrations. My security team spoke with event organizers. It took far longer than I expected. He glanced toward Ethan. My son refused to stop searching. Ethan smiled. We knew we would find you eventually. Vanessa finally stepped forward. I'm sorry to interrupt. Richard looked at her politely. If you'll allow me. His tone remained courteous. I'm almost finished. Something in his calm confidence made Vanessa stop speaking. She stepped back without another word. Richard slowly turned to face the guests again. I've spent decades building companies. I've received awards. I've attended more ceremonies than I can remember. He paused. But one afternoon changed the way I thought about success. He looked directly at Noella. I realized character is easiest to recognize when nobody believes they're being watched. Several guests quietly nodded. Even those who had never met Richard understood the weight behind his words. Ethan reached into the leather portfolio he had carried into the ballroom. He carefully removed a dark blue presentation folder, embossed with the Langford Foundation seal in silver lettering. The sight alone drew curious whispers. What's that? Is this some kind of award? No idea. Ethan carried the folder to his father without opening it. Richard accepted it but kept it closed. Instead, he looked at Noella. She still seemed completely overwhelmed. I imagine you're wondering why we've come here tonight. She gave a small, uncertain nod. I honestly am. Richard smiled. So is everyone else. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the room before fading again. He rested one hand on the folder. Then he spoke slowly enough that every word landed. Miss Brooks. He paused. Everything we're announcing tonight. His eyes never left hers. Exists because of one decision you made. The room held its breath. Noella looked from Richard to the unopened presentation folder. Then to Ethan. I don't understand, she admitted softly. Richard nodded with a kind smile. I didn't expect you to. He opened the folder and removed several neatly bound documents. This evening isn't about repaying a favor. He glanced around the ballroom. It's about honoring a principle. The room remained completely silent. Richard continued. The day you helped me, I asked myself a difficult question. He paused. How many people spend their lives waiting for help that never comes? Noella listened quietly. I had spent decades investing in businesses, Richard said. Yet I realized I had overlooked something far more important. He held up the first document. My family decided to establish a nationwide emergency assistance initiative for elderly people who are left alone during medical crises. A quiet murmur swept through the ballroom. The guests had expected a generous thank you. No one had expected something this significant. Richard smiled at Noella. The idea began because of you. He handed the folder to Ethan. Ethan stepped beside Noella. Our family discussed naming the initiative after my father. He shook his head. Then we realized that would completely miss the point. He opened the folder to the first page. Printed across the top was the title of the new program. The Noella Initiative. Her eyes widened. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. You can't be serious. We are, Richard replied. The program will partner with hospitals, emergency responders, and community organizations across the country. He gestured toward the documents. And we'd like you to lead it. The room erupted into stunned whispers. Someone near the back quietly gasped. Another guest murmured, She's being offered the position. Richard nodded. We've spent months designing this foundation. But none of us believes it should be led by someone who simply understands business. He looked directly at Noella. It should be led by someone who understands compassion. Noella looked down at the proposal in disbelief. I've never run a charitable foundation. Richard smiled. I know. You've led compliance teams. You've managed complex organizations. And more importantly, he paused. You've already demonstrated the one quality that can't be taught. She looked up. What quality? Richard's answer came without hesitation. Doing the right thing when nobody is watching. For the first time all evening, Noella smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was one of quiet disbelief. I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer tonight, Ethan said warmly. We only wanted you to hear this from us personally. Richard turned toward the guests. There is one more thing. Everyone listened. When my son entered this ballroom, he glanced toward Ethan with an amused smile. He overheard several conversations. Noella looked at Ethan. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. I heard people laughing because you had arrived alone. Several relatives lowered their heads. I realized I had two choices. He smiled apologetically. I could interrupt politely, or I could stop the humiliation immediately. A few guests chuckled softly. So I walked over. He looked at Noella, took your hand, and said the first thing that came to mind. Sorry I'm late, darling. Even Noella laughed. So that wasn't planned. Not even a little. I owe you an apology, Ethan said sincerely. I knew people would misunderstand. I just wanted the laughter to stop. She smiled. It worked. The ballroom felt completely different now. Only an hour earlier, relatives had mocked Noella for walking in alone. Now no one seemed capable of meeting her eyes. Melissa quietly approached first. I'm sorry. Noella looked at her calmly. For what? Melissa swallowed. For laughing. For assuming things. For joining in. Noella gave a small nod. I appreciate you saying that. She neither embraced her nor offered empty reassurance. Some apologies deserved acknowledgement, not immediate forgiveness. An aunt stepped forward next. I never realized. No, Noella answered gently. You never tried. The words weren't spoken with anger. Only honesty. No one argued. Because no one could. Vanessa finally walked over. The confidence she had carried all evening had disappeared. I owe you an apology too. Noella waited. I wanted everyone to admire my wedding. Vanessa looked around the ballroom. I thought making jokes about you would make me seem funnier. She lowered her eyes. I didn't expect. She couldn't finish the sentence. You didn't expect anyone to stand beside me, Noella said quietly. Vanessa nodded. No. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Then Noella answered with complete calm. I hope one day you understand that humiliating someone doesn't make another person shine brighter. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She nodded silently. There was nothing left to defend. As dinner finally began, the conversations around the ballroom were no longer about wealth. They weren't about Ethan. They weren't even about Richard. Guests talked quietly about the story of a woman who had helped a stranger without expecting recognition. Business leaders approached Noella to congratulate her. Hospital administrators expressed interest in supporting the new initiative. For the first time at a Brooks family gathering, people wanted to know who Noella really was. Ironically, she no longer needed their approval. 4 months later, the Noella initiative officially launched. Working alongside Richard and Ethan, Noella built partnerships with hospitals, emergency responders, and volunteer organizations dedicated to ensuring that elderly people facing medical emergencies would never be left without immediate assistance. The program expanded steadily. Every success reminded her of a rainy afternoon she had never considered extraordinary. Richard often introduced her with the same sentence. This entire program exists because one woman refused to walk past someone in need. As for family gatherings, Noella attended only when she genuinely wanted to. She no longer arrived hopping to prove herself. She no longer measured her worth by the opinions waiting inside a ballroom. She had learned something far more valuable. The people who laughed because she walked into a wedding alone had judged her by who stood beside her. The people who truly mattered judged her by the person she chose to be when she stood alone.